Today, some really cool, nuanced action, sports, wildlife photography settings for the Z8 and Z9 users to consider. Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. So this week we're gonna talk a fair bit about action settings, both autofocus and just general settings for working in situations like sports, wildlife, auto sports, air shows, whatever it is where you're photographing fast-moving subjects. And we'll kind of do a little rundown of what my settings for these cameras are. It really is going to be a video that's more pertinent for those of you with the Z8 and Z9 bodies. But I think a lot of people who shoot Nikon or even other camera brands will be curious to see what's possible with this camera. And I'm going to run through, looking through the lens, let you see what I'm doing and show you how I kind of negotiate all the different potential settings and use this camera to its max in complex shooting environments like the jungles of Costa Rica. And I really do owe my friend, my good buddy, Dennis Valverde, and someone who I will not go lead workshops in Costa Rica without for some of these settings. We'll talk about them in a minute. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about a sobering subject. Friends of mine have completely lost their homes and everything they have in Switzerland, in the Loschental Valley, in the small town of Blatten. A glacier collapsed up high above. There was a bunch of debris fall. It got unsteady. Thankfully, they evacuated the entire town. It's the little town that I went to with Naya Evo, you know, my favorite backpack makers, the guys who make what I consider the best backpacks on the planet, to just kind of test some new products, meet up with a bunch of European photographers and have an adventure in the mountains. It's a wonderful town, and I made friends with some of the local people there, both the innkeeper, Lucas, and the local photographer, Chrissy, and her husband and her wonderful dog. And it's just really hard to think about that town getting flattened. So I'm going to put a couple of links in this video's full description for you to run and see what's happening there, and look for some updates from me in the not so distant future. There may be some links to kind of help out with people who've lost everything. My friend Chrissy said she had 5 minutes to evacuate. She took her laptop, her dog, and got out. Her husband was at work and didn't have any time to grab anything from home, and 2 days later there's 100 meters of glacial and rock and just debris burying what was a spectacular town with buildings that were centuries old. So I also thought I'd just put a quick link right here if you want to go see the video that we did. I'll put it to the point where it was just sort of the sights and sounds of that beautiful place, and we can remember what an awesome, awesome place it was and how fragile things are, and just have a moment to remember to be thankful for all that we have and remember to live in the moment, because things just happen really, really fast sometimes. All right, so let's talk about these Z9 settings. As I said, I really owe these nuanced new tweaks. They're just some tweaks to the settings that we've already established to Dennis Valverde. And I want to remind everybody that no matter what Nikon body you shoot, I create a playlist, or Leica cameras that I use, and if you're a viewer of this channel and a subscriber and you're curious, or even if you've just stumbled upon this video for the first time, I create playlists for each camera. If you look on my channel, you can either search for Z9 or you can go into the playlist section. There's no less than 39 videos on the Z9 since this camera launched. Every time there's a major firmware update, I do a video talking about how we can use the new potential from new settings and menu items. I'm constantly updating my settings files that you can download from my website and upload into your camera to follow along in my settings descriptions, having settings exactly the way I set my camera up. And I would suggest you maybe do that while you're watching my setup videos, and then tweak it to your own taste, make changes that suit your shooting style better. And again, you can run over to my website and click to download the latest Z9 settings file that includes these little tweaks I'm talking about carrying my camera right here. Z8 shooters, I'll talk to you towards the end of this video, and I'm going to showcase how you can make the tweaks yourself. When we do a next major firmware revision for the Z8, I'll get a hold of one and I'll incorporate these updates into whatever else is going to be with the new firmware. So first off, Dennis Valverde, thanks so much for this little tweak, particularly your tweak to lower shutter speed while we're getting rid of subject detection for tricky situations with more static subjects. I think this is particularly helpful in wildlife shooting and sports shooting, but it could be useful in all kinds of action scenarios. So first I want to just run down how I use this camera in action scenarios. So I'm going to set up and showcase some of my settings and how I use the camera while you look through the lens. All right, so I've got a whiteboard off to my left. And in this demo, I'm gonna do the horrible composition move of kind of looking out of the frame and shooting out of the frame, but I'm gonna project what's happening on my Z9 right here. And remember, when I'm talking about the function buttons on my Z9, it's gonna be function 1 is the top button that's right under my middle finger when I'm in shooting position in a normal kind of landscape mode. Function 2 is that middle button. Function 3 is the lower button that's more kind of aligned for my ring finger of my right hand. And then there's 2 lens function buttons on this particular lens that I'm using. I program both of them the same because sometimes there are lenses with only a single function button and they call that lens function 1. Sometimes there are ones with 2, like my 100 to 400 that I'm using here, and lens function 2 fits right where I want to be able to use it. So I'm going to talk about that settings change that Dennis in Costa Rica made to the recall shooting functions hold set up in the action shooting bank B for these cameras, the Z8, Z9. For the Z8 shooters, just sort of ignore what's happening with button 2, function button 2, the one that kind of lands under that middle finger there in the middle of the front of the Z9. You've only got 2 function buttons, but you would just think of function 1 and function 3 being the same as function 1 and function 2 on your camera. There's no function, there's not a third button, all right? So, I'm gonna just sort of start out just sort of refreshing action settings that I use in the Z9, all right? And I'll talk about navigating the system. I'm just gonna be looking through the viewfinder the whole time. You're gonna see what I'm seeing through the viewfinder. I'm gonna use some prints that I have up on my whiteboard out of the frame. And right now, here as I hold the camera up, you can see I've got some prints over there. And I'm just gonna jump into my eye menu because I do so much through my eye menu and function buttons, all right? I got some important stuff, some prints that I've been making and proofing and having fun with and stuff from my kids up on my whiteboard. If I go into my banks, you can see I'm in shooting bank A and I'm in custom settings bank A. That's, if I jump in, those are my standard sort of knock around banks, all right? In those banks, you can see I'm autofocus continuous, so it's gonna track moving subjects. I'm 3D, and the subject detection right now is set at auto, all right? And if you look around the frame, I've got all my information set up and displayed under the display settings, and I'm in single frame capture. Up at the top left there, I am in single frame capture. I'm not in a multiple burst. I'm just in that kind of knock around snapshotting mode, 3D, I can set it up on this person in Cuba. Ooh, I could set it up on Penguin Rock and Joshua Tree under the Milky Way. Ooh, I can set it up on Rick in Double Arch in Joshua or in Moab during our workshop there, okay? I can zoom in, I can zoom out. But all of a sudden, I'm seeing that, there's birds. This bird looks like it might be about to fly, all right? So I have a mode in my general knockaround mode. I have function 3, that would be function 2 for you Z8 shooters, set that if I tap it, it instantly switches to bird detect autofocus. See, when I tap, it goes from auto to bird detect. Still 3D, 20 frames per second, and it jumps my shutter speed from wherever I happen to be right up to 1/1250th of a second, all right, for fast action capture. So now, if I hit that button, I zoom in, all of a sudden, I'm ready to capture a burst, and I generally use this for if there's suddenly an interesting bird. Now, if I were hiking in the wilderness and I thought it was likely I'd see a bear, I might jump into my settings, my recall shooting function hold settings for function 3 in the controls menu and the controls, shooting controls, and I would change that to animal detect from bird. But more often than not, in the types of work I've been doing lately, it's birds that pop up unexpectedly. And so having it be bird detect works great. And often, frequently, bird detect works pretty good for animals too. Here's this howler monkey in Costa Rica, or this frog in Costa Rica. All right, now I navigate what mode I'm in for my main mode. I can change that in my eye menu. As I said, I'm constantly shifting with the eye menu, and I love the ability to switch to auto area focus mode, or which subject detection method I want, or none, right there in the eye menu while looking through the viewfinder as quick as can be, all right? That's how I navigate it. But let's say I'm really gonna go out and I'm gonna shoot action, dedicated action work, all right? Well, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna jump in here and I'm gonna change a few settings, all right, before I actually go out and really am out on an action-oriented shoot. Let's say I'm in Costa Rica photographing monkeys and birds and things like that. So what I'm gonna do, again, I'm gonna look through my viewfinder and I'm gonna switch, I could do this on the back LCD if I'm on the tripod, into my action shooting bank, into my action custom settings shooting bank, and that sets up all of my settings differently. All right, I'm in wide area detection mode. All right, right now I happen to be in bird. The last time I was using my settings, I was in bird. I'm gonna switch my drive mode to 20 frames per second. Just turning that dial for you with the Z8, you'd hit the drive mode button and switch into 20 frames per second. That way I'm shooting bursts, all right? If I wanted to be shooting animal instead of bird, I would run over just like I did in my knock around standard mode, and I would switch over to animal, and now it's gonna be looking better at monkeys' faces, all right? But that's really sort of beside the point. What I really wanna showcase is, this cool mode. Well, let me talk through the control modes first. When I'm in my custom settings and shooting bank B, the action bank, my buttons do some different things. My top button, function 1, jumps from DX to FX. Right now I was in DX. You can see that blinking warning up in the top right corner. If I hit the button, boom, I'm back into full frame, all right? Lets me just quickly crop in to fill the frame. Let's say I've got a scene like this crazy frog I call the hypnotoad, all right? He's not loving animal detect autofocus, but hitting that button lets me zoom in and fill the frame more. I know I'm gonna crop away all this stuff, the magnets on the board and the frame of the photo. If I hit that button, I can really zoom in and use the center DX crop of this big 46 megapixel sensor and not worry about cropping as much later, not capture as much data, all right? I'm able to fill the frame a little better. That's my function button 1. Function 2, which I have for the Z9, lets me just clear all the information and really see what I'm framing up, all right? It gets rid of all the distractions in my frame, all right? Function 3, that's the special one, and that's what we're about to talk about. All right, so let's say that we're tracking moving subjects. You can see I'm at 16,000 ISO. The studio's dark. I'm underexposed wide open, all right? I'm not using a 2.8 lens. I'm using a long 100 to 400 that when I zoom out, my maximum aperture goes out to f5.6. I'm pretty underexposed photographing this macaw, all right? I hit the back button, focus button, and I also have a couple of cool things programmed in here. One is auto area autofocus on my display button, all right? And then on the Z9, I remap the display button to quality down below. I can change my display options using the quality button instead of display, but display is a second autofocus button that's just auto area autofocus. If bird's in flight in bird detect auto mode, so if I suddenly thought this bird was gonna fly, I would jump in here, I would drop down, I would put it in bird detect autofocus, and I would just hold down the auto area. If I'm picking up a bird in flight, auto area does such an amazing job in bird detect. All right, so one button is gonna lock in what's in my wide area, and then I can hand that off to my lens function button, either lens function 1 or lens function 2, to a 3D tracking point that goes frame wide. I don't have to keep it in the box anymore. I let go, and I'm back to my wide area. I could say I want the bird on the right, not the one on the left if there were two. Boom, I can lock it with back button focus with my thumb and then switch to my left thumb on the lens and track it frame wide. It transfers that captured point that you got in wide area over to 3D tracking that goes frame wide. Let go, reacquire, switch. All right, that's really easy. The display button is just auto area. It's gonna pick up whatever it's looking for. So, let me zoom back a little bit and get out of DX mode. I'll zoom back a little bit, say the hypnotoad, boom, I locked it in 3D, okay, boom, I'm saying auto area. It's not, well, there it is, picking up the frog. It's looking for subjects in auto area, all right? It's making the decision. The second I hit the display button, it's choosing, and it's doing a pretty good job, all right, in bird detect autofocus. The cool revolution 2 years ago when I went to Costa Rica and worked with Dennis was his recall shooting functions hold to turn off subject detection. All right, let's say you've got a situation where subject detection isn't working so well for you. I'm gonna jump into my eye menu and I'm gonna put subject detection on auto subject detection, and I'll bet it doesn't do as good a job with our hypnotoad. It's not. it doesn't see it. Even if I zoom in, it's sort of picking the wrong thing. All right, it's not really going for Hypnotoad's eye. So the Hypnotoad's not moving very much. Typically these situations where we're not fighting to track a quick moving subject, that's where we start getting frustrated with, well, I really want the eye really precisely. So you tap that function 3 button and all of a sudden you're in 3D area mode with no subject detection using recall shooting functions hold. Or what you'll also notice, and that's a really cool thing that Dennis has come up with, is dropping the shutter speed simultaneously. If you want a faster shutter, it's a quick roll to be right back. All right, just a few clicks of the wheel. But setting it at 320th of a second, it's also a few clicks to go down as low as you can shoot this image stabilized lens. And watch my ISO get cleaner. All right. Boom, now I'm suddenly down at 2000 instead of 16,000 ISO. And in burst mode, I can handhold this lens easily at a 40th of a second. All right, boom. And because we have a 3D tracking point that's not smart, I can set it on any part of the scene I want, and it's not gonna get fooled looking for a false eye. I could say I want the nose, and it's gonna ignore the eyes. I can say I want this howler monkey's paw, and it's gonna ignore. See, I could say I want Rick. It's going to ignore anything else in the frame. Really, really handy, all right? The top of Mount Hood with the crescent moon. All right, back to our bird. The minute I hit the recall shooting functions hold button, function 3, function 2 for UZ8 users again, boom, I'm back. Suddenly I'm back to 1250th of a second, you know, that action capturing mode. Things are moving. I'm underexposing. I've set my max ISO to 16,000. It's dark in the studio even with lights on my whiteboard. I can lock that again. You know, I can capture. I can let's say I focus on something else. I come back across and it sees the eye. I hit the button. It locks focus on the eye. I hit the lens function button and let go of the AF on button at the back of the camera with my thumb. And all of a sudden I'm tracking frame wide in 3D. I let go. I can reacquire in the box. I hit the display button. It's going to do auto area, autofocus till it finds an eye. Boom. I've got all those modes right at my disposal, but the minute I hit recall shooting functions hold, it's going to slow down to where I was last. I like to keep it about 320th of a second. I can quickly spin it to another location, right? Just that simply. It does remember where you change it to, which is actually really handy when you're working in these kinds of conditions. It's going to give me 3D with no subject detection, so I pick, you know, what is important to me. It's that frog's eye right there. That's where I want to connect, all right? That simple. I let off, I go back to that auto thing, and it's not finding the eye. It's struggling. It's looking at the frog's mouth. It's not right on the eye. Boop. Hit that, slows down my shutter. I can adjust it from there. I remembered I was at 1/60th. I like to leave it by initially, when you turn the camera on, I program it to be 320th of a second. Again, I can hit DX mode, boom, really zoom in, lock that eye, compose, fire, boom, that easy, all right? So Dennis's revolution really is just adding shutter speed into recall shooting functions hold, because the times where you want to finally control the point, you want it to be a 3D point with no subject detection, are not when you're capturing erratically moving birds in flight or monkeys running through the trees. In those situations, you generally want wide area with subject detection, and then you're trying to lock it off to the lens function button when you can to go frame wide. Or birds in flight, you're using auto area with bird subject detection to just snap that bird. You know, it's the only thing in the frame. You're photographing birds in flight. When you really want to turn off subject detection is when you're trying to fine-tune, say, a portrait of an animal in a situation where either the vegetation or some marking on the animal is fooling the camera and it's seeing the wrong thing. It's not locking the eye, and it's making it frustrating for you because subject detection's failing you. Well, boop, you hit recall shooting functions hold, gives you a 3D point that you can put wherever you want, track frame wide, and it locks that point without subject detection to mess you up. Plus drops the shutter speed down where you can choose to lower it for a really finely crafted low ISO shot, or speed it up if there's things moving. It puts you in that middle range at 320th of a second that it's easy to move back and forth from. All right, so as promised, let's talk about how to set up some of this stuff. Again, I've got my full settings file that you can just upload into your camera, linked in this video's full description, and I linked it earlier. But I'm just gonna walk through particularly the recall shooting functions hold and how we set that up, all right? So I'm gonna just jump in, have a look right here really quick in my I menu. We're in Shooting Bank A, we're in Custom Settings Bank A. I'm gonna jump into the menu, and we'll run over to just confirm that. Yes, we're in Photo Shooting Bank A. Yes, we're in Custom Settings Bank. Let's see, oops, let me go over. We're in Custom Settings Bank A, and we're gonna run down to Controls, F. All right, this is Photography Shooting Controls. And we're gonna go into Custom Controls for Shooting, F2, all right? And you can see that on my function 3 button, I do something different for my knock around mode. I have bracketing burst so that I can hold that button when I when I fire the shutter, and it'll fire all 3 frames of a bracketed burst or all 5 frames. I have live information display view off. I generally do that for that middle button on my Z9 for all of my banks. That clear, undistracted view, but then recall shooting functions hold, all right? So I wanna just show you how I've set that up. I'm gonna press that. If I was running up and down my list, I would go to recall shooting functions hold. That means I press the button and it stays there until I press the button again to cancel it. And the things I've changed are I want shooting mode to be manual. I want shutter speed to be 1/1250th of a second. I want my aperture as wide open as possible. The widest setting they give you is 0.95. I don't want any exposure compensation. ISO sensitivity are a base of 64 with auto ISO turned on. Metering should be matrix. Autofocus area mode is 3D. Autofocus subject detection options. This is where you could choose, say you're shooting dogs and cats, it should be animal instead of bird. If you're shooting vehicles, it should be vehicle. If things that jump out that suddenly are action or more people for you, use people, or you can use auto. That's always option 2. All right, I'm leaving birds because lately that's what's been popping up surprising me, and I want to shoot quickly. And I find that bird detect works really well with animals too. Focus tracking, I just leave that at its standard setting, but I could change it around if I wanted to. In the release mode, this is what's so cool that you can do with recall shooting functions hold. The release mode is 20 frames per second. So when I'm in my knock around mode here, let's say I was in single frame, all right, all of a sudden when I hit that recall shooting function, boom, I'm in 3D, bird detect, 20 frames a second, and my shutter speed's 1250th of a second, aperture's as wide open as possible. Boom, auto ISO. All right, set, all right? Now let's talk about how we would set up in Bank B, all right? So I'm gonna go into Bank B. I'm using the touch screen here, boom, I'm in Bank B, super quick, right? I can look at my options. I'm in auto subject detection in wide area large, just like we showcased a second ago. The way I set this all up, right, I changed those kinds of settings obviously here on the I menu where it's so quick. I can say boom, 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 all right, done, right? So, but to set up the controls, we're gonna once again run here into controls, but this time we're in Shooting Bank B, the action banks. And under controls, we're gonna go into that custom controls for shooting again. And you can see I've got function 1 is that switch FX and DX. That's so handy. Function 2 is still live information display view off. I love that clean view when I'm composing and I have time to do it. Function 3, recall shooting functions hold, a little bit different this time. I'm gonna hit the button, we could go down the list, we go over to the right, and my shutter speed is 1/320th of a second. That's the add-in that Dennis was telling me about. It didn't seem like that big a deal till I'm out in the jungles of Costa Rica and suddenly an animal stops moving. I look, I'm at something like 10,000 ISO. I think, do I really want to be at 10,000 ISO? This animal's not moving, and I can just hit that function 3 button and boom, I'm suddenly at 320th of a second with a 3D point that I can set on that stationary subject's eye and lock its eye so it travels frame wide and have a shutter speed that's closer to where I'd like to roll my shutter speed down to. I was shooting with my 400 2.8 TC lens down to a 60th of a second, no problem, for if subjects weren't moving that fast, and suddenly getting down from 10,000 or 12,000 ISO down to 400, 500 ISO, which is so much more clean. All right, so jumping back into our menu, the camera had timed out. We've got back into the recall shooting functions hold. So 1/320th of a second. And then the other thing that's really important, 3D area mode. That way you can put that point that moves all over the frame, and subject detection option off. That's the critical one. That's the real serious one. And again, these settings are all linked in this video's full description. You can run over to my website into the free download section and download this file to upload into your camera and have all these settings dialed in. You know, when you launch your camera in that, it'll be in the A banks and my knockaround shooting mode. If you want to adjust it though, you know how to do it. Oh, and just to reiterate, that settings file that I'm offering for download is for the Z9 only. The minute that there's a major update, a major firmware update for the Z8, I'll update that settings file with the loaner camera that I'll get from Nikon, and I'll add in that shutter speed tweak. For those of you that are Z8 shooters, just run in to the custom settings in your Bank B, jump into function 2 buttons, recall shooting function hold settings, and just add in that shutter speed tweak. That's the only major change that's happening there. So I just walked through how to do it on the Z9. It's identical for the Z8, except you're going to do it for function 2, where we have recall shooting functions hold set up on the Z8. All right, everybody. Well, I hope that made sense. Again, the settings file for the Z9 over on my website. You can just run over to the free download section. Click right here and download that Z9 settings file. Just play around with it, practice with it. Again, photography is a practice, just like a musical instrument, just like a sport. The more you're doing it, the more honed you become. You know, I had a whole group with me in Costa Rica who felt, a number of people initially, as if some of these options on the Z8 and Z9 with these settings are just like, well, what do I do when? There's so many options, the hybrid handoff, the different tracking modes, the different subject detection modes, the display button being auto area. But after a day in a target-rich environment like the jungles of the Oso Peninsula with Dennis Valverde and David Archer and I, people by the second and third day are saying, whoa, these settings are amazing. I get it now. I see how it works. It's practice. Practice, practice, practice. You know, we won't be leading a workshop in Costa Rica next year. We're taking a year off, but we will be the year after. If you're headed to Costa Rica, look up Dennis, and I owe him for a lot of my action autofocus nuanced settings with the Z9 and Z8. He's an amazing photographer, amazing guy, wonderful guy. I'll put links in this video's full description to his Instagram and his email. Get with Dennis if you're going to Costa Rica. You owe it to yourself. We'll be running a workshop in Charleston, South Carolina, depending on demand, maybe 2 next spring, and there will be lots of birds in flight and wildlife photography opportunities in the swamps of Charleston, alongside amazing food and architecture and landscape shooting with David Archer and Rick. So, you know, hit Rick LePage up about that if you're interested in it, or run over to the workshop webpage and make sure you're getting notified in advance of those slots opening up. We have so much fun, and it's really fun to work with people in the field and see the light click on with some of this stuff while they're working with us. So, all right, everybody, I want to remind a quick pitch for our June, I think it's 17th, mid-month. We're doing office hours. It's a gallery, 10 a.m. Pacific on a Tuesday. Submit your images. We're going to run through and look at everyone's images. This is an opportunity to showcase your favorite work of the year. Instructions are over on the Office Hours webpage. You can click right here or run over to hudsonhenry.com/office hours. All right, so I hope everybody's taken this in. If you've got feedback or comments, you know, hit me in the YouTube comments or email me. I'm always excited to hear what you have to say. Your feedback drives the content in this channel, and I appreciate it so much. You have no idea. Thanks so much again for sharing, liking, and subscribing, for running over to my links page and using my links. Those really help us out with the content we create on this channel, and we keep links to everything that we use, recommend, and review with links to the reviews over on the website. You just go to hudsonhenry.com/ATS links or click right here. And you know, it's summertime in the Northern Hemisphere. I hope people are enjoying. The weather's been amazing here in the Pacific Northwest. People in the Southern Hemisphere, I love fall. Late fall is some of the most beautiful times to be out photographing. So I hope everyone is out there being creative, being safe, practicing with their gear, getting that muscle memory in shape, keeping that creative imaging engine running in the mind. Practice, practice, practice. Stay safe, stay creative, and we'll see you next week.